Welcome to Equipping Leaders, a podcast where I share tools and perspectives to equip leaders in self-development and team connection. I am your host, Natasha, and I am excited to share today's episode with you. Our episode today is a conversation with leader developer Jane Munagian on building and leading teams of strong leaders.
Thank you so much for joining me, Jane. Can I have you introduce yourself and tell us your style of leadership?
My style of leadership. I will be happy to do that, Natasha. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm sure it's because you couldn't get anyone else. My name is Jane Munagian, and my style of leadership is authentic and vulnerable and hopefully humble.
I love that. And I can speak to that a little bit. I remember in one of our first encounters, you gave me this Jane's user manual, which I thought was so incredible. So could you tell us a little bit more about the user manual and how that became such a part of your style?
Sure. So personal user manual is very simply a document to jumpstart a relationship because, like I said, authenticity, vulnerability, humility, those are all really important values to me in life and in my leadership. And you're going to need to get to those things eventually. So why not get to them early? I think maybe in my younger days, I would have been reticent to write down some of the things I write down in there because I talk about my weaknesses. I talk about things that scare me, things that I'm good at, things that I'm not so good at. But I have found that it's a great way to share a little bit more about me as a human, not so much me as my career, but just me as a human. So you start getting an understanding of what it's going to be like to work with me. And because I am a human, what are some of the things that I struggle with and some of the ways that you can help me and some of the ways that I think I can help you. So I found it to be really helpful, and I don't think I've ever totally terrified anyone with what I wrote in there, maybe. But like I said, I think because I've got a little more gray hair, I'm a little less concerned that I'm going to irritate someone or put someone off by something I put in there.
And I think that it speaks a lot to your style of leadership because sometimes people come into new situations and they feel the need to tell someone their resume. And that's great, good on someone for their accomplishments. But also that doesn't tell me anything about what the day-to-day is like. So I know that I personally found that really impactful and also something that I plan to steal.
Oh, no, it's not stealing. It's a gift to you. I also think it's too easy to operate on assumptions, like how other people want to work or how other people want to communicate, or assuming that someone will figure out how I want to communicate. And I don't think that's possible. I think you actually do have to tell someone, hey, give me the punchline first. And then if I need details, I'll ask, right? As opposed to, I don't need to hear every little thing in order to make a decision. Or, hey, sometimes it might sound like I'm directing you, but I almost never direct. It's just how I talk, right? Because I've stumbled on that in my life where people were like, well, you told me to do this. And it's like, oh my gosh, didn't mean to. I literally was brainstorming, but it just sounded like I was directing. So I like to upfront tell people, if you think I'm directing, please say, are you literally telling me to do this? Or is this just a harebrained idea? And nine and a half times out of 10, it's just a harebrained idea.
We're workshopping it till we get to the final product.
Right, yeah. Because I'm not super directive with my leadership style. It's only if I feel like it's really needed because there's an emergency or something's on fire, or I see someone's really struggling.
Yes, but I think that's also such an important thing that leaders need to adopt more of now, where it's not a monologue, it is a dialogue. And if it becomes a monologue, it's because there's something wrong that needs to be fixed, and there can still be dialogue, but I want to be clear, like Brene Brown says, clear is kind. So let me just get that out of the way so that we can continue to dialogue. But I think some leaders, unfortunately many leaders, get into this monologue mindset.
And they think they're actually having a dialogue, but it's really just a monologue delivered to a witness. It's just, you're not engaging with this person. You're not really, truly listening. You're not really, truly listening to be altered, right? Thinking about I'm totally open to what this person might say. And I'm not, I'm not great at that, but it is something I strive for sure.
It's funny. It just reminds me of a lot of times in the military, people would tell me a story and then later they'd be like, I mentored Orslane. And I'd be like, it was not topical. It didn't end. And so it was like, oftentimes we think we're doing one thing and no one around us would agree.
Right, right.
Was there a specific like event or catalyst that really helped you step into the role of leader, or a moment when you were like, it's me, I'm the one in charge, let's do this?
God, I'd love to say yes and then have a great story as to what really provoked me, but I think I'm just sort of hardwired that way. I'm pretty sure somebody told me once, or maybe I dreamt this, but I think someone told me once that like, you cannot not lead. Like it's just part and parcel of who I am. There wasn't a pivotal moment, but I think pretty early in my career when I felt like I like to do this. I don't know if I'm particularly good at it, but it feels natural. And it doesn't feel like it's something I want to run away from. I guarantee I wasn't super intentional about it. Like, I'm sure it was just sort of a feeling I was having like, oh, well, I kind of like this. I'll look for this again, or I'll do more of this, or I'll look for more opportunities where I can lead people or lead a project.
I think sometimes people think that it's like a Mack truck that hits you and you're like, this is it, the start of my leadership journey. When really there are, for many people, they maybe just don't acknowledge it that way, but it is this thing that like, they don't start from like when the seed was planted and then kind of cultivated over time, but rather kind of focusing on this one thing where they were like, yeah, I did this, I made this decision at this point, and that's when I knew I could step into it. So kind of always just acknowledging that it's there and it's in you. Some people are born natural leaders, so it's nature and nurture, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't mean to say like I'm a natural leader and I'm great at it. It's just, I think I also had people in my life, people that I worked with who saw it in me and gave me opportunities. And even if I didn't know I was ready, and maybe I wasn't ready, but they were taking a chance on me, like, yeah, we'll put her in charge of this project, or we'll give her these direct reports. We have confidence that she can do that. And then the more I did it, the more I liked it. And it just felt, like I said, natural.
Well, and I think it also goes to that like natural side where sometimes people have to be like, like you are literally like dragging them, sometimes kicking and screaming into leadership positions. And maybe eventually they kind of warm up to it. But yeah, I think that kind of when people say they're more natural leaders, I think that it's just this courageousness of, no, I believe I can do that, and not like, oh, I don't know, I kind of want to be or here. So some people are just natural leaders. So can you tell us more about your experience in the leader development space?
I went to graduate school because I decided that I was very specific is what I wanted to do. I wanted to go into what we then called change management. And I wanted to work for a particular company, that being Accenture, and I wanted to be a partner with Accenture. This was my goal. And I actually met with a partner at Accenture who went sort of that path. And so I got my master's in instructional design with the idea of going in to work for the firm, as we called it, and skipping my way into partner. So after graduate school, I actually went to work for a very small consulting firm that specialized in strategy and leadership and team development. And I was, at the bottom rung of the firm, and I did a lot of focus group facilitation, report writing, needs assessment stuff. The guy who was the head of the company, it was a very small company, he was super skilled in strategy and leadership and team development. So I learned a lot in a short amount of time. And then it actually gave me some good experience to go work for Accenture, which I then went to do. And I was able to come in with some experience. I came in at a little higher level. And the whole time I worked for the firm, I worked in human performance. Not as much in leadership development, because at that time we were doing a whole lot of technology implementations, and that's where the money was too. but it wasn't really what I loved to do. I loved the human performance aspect of it, but I wasn't like a huge fan of technology. So it was after that I went to work for a small startup, because that's what one did in those days. It was also, it was sort of setting up their learning and development practice, but again, very technology focused. And I just knew it wasn't what I wanted to do. So I decided to look for something that was in the leadership space. And that's when I went to work for Gap Inc., which is sort of the umbrella for the different brands in the Gap organization. And my focus was leadership development, and I built out their leadership development program for directors and senior directors, and it was a great program. They used it for many, many years. I worked with some amazing people. I learned a ton. I knew it was what I really loved to do. So after that, I actually had an opportunity to go to a small consulting firm with some ex-Accenture folks, specifically to work on a project at the FBI and to work at 10 Penn at the FBI headquarters, the J. Edgar Hoover building. And it sort of sounded like an opportunity I couldn't pass up, because it just sounded so interesting to me and almost a little surreal. And so I took that, and though the work was more about building out a career service for a couple of new positions that came out of the 9/11 Commission report, I definitely was more interested in the leadership side of that. And I worked with some really great leaders, and I worked actually on the same floor as Robert Mueller. And not that he and I interacted a ton, but I was able to see him in certain settings. And I worked with the director of intelligence at the time at the FBI, and she was an amazing leader. And so I was sort of learning through observation, and the opportunity did turn out to be fantastic. I continued to do that sort of work for this small consulting firm even after the FBI gig. And though it wasn't always the type of work I could do, because in consulting sometimes, you got to do, especially for a small firm, got to do the work that is there. But I built the learning and development team, and I think that's where I really started to hone my own leadership and to come into my own a little bit more. And I think I became a little bit more of a student of leadership, though not anything like you, so there's not even a comparison, but in my world and limited view. So I kind of have done this consulting industry. So though I always think like a consultant, I was ready to go into an organization and work on, focus on their leadership development and really helping to build greater leaders so that they could have a greater impact on the people that they work with. And an opportunity came along at Electronic Arts, and I thought, gaming? I don't know anything about gaming, and it's far from my house, and sounds like a great job, but I don't think it's the right one for me. But the hiring manager was very persistent, and I'm awfully glad, because I have been at Electronic Arts for 9 years, and I've done leadership development from executive through manager. And, now the team, as you know, has a pretty big remit with executive development, pipeline development, director development, manager development, individual contributor development. But I always keep my feet in some of the leadership development work, specifically executive development now. And I just feel really grateful, because it's the work I really like to do. It's still very interesting to me. And even though I've been doing it for 107 years, it still feels like the right thing to do.
That's amazing, and such a varied experience. And I really love how you said that when you had the opportunity to be in leader development, just how much you liked it and how it felt so right. I think there's something that's so amazing about talking with leaders and kind of seeing where they are, where they want to be, what needs to be fixed, maybe in mindset. But it's just being in that, I feel like, is also such a good finger on the pulse of what the workplace looks like and where people know it can go and have these ideas about it and what their struggles are in getting there. And is it a personal thing? Is it a systemic thing? So yeah, leader development, as you know, also has my heart.
Yeah, and you can really understand, yes, I could have focused on process or technology or strategy, but it was really the people part of the work that was really interesting me. And I kind of cringe when people say I just really love working with people, because I really don't that much. But I really understand the impact of a leader and what a great leader can do and what a not yet great leader can do. And I've experienced really great leaders and I've experienced really terrible leaders, and just understanding the personal impact and understanding the impact on the organization and understanding the health of the team. It's so glaringly obvious, right? That if you can do it well, you can really have an impact on the lives of people and the success of an organization.
Yes. And I think as the leader development and even just the workplace space is becoming more inclusive in a lot of ways, more inclusive of different types of thought, different ways of doing work, it also really, we're in this amazing golden age, I think, of being able to truly be an authentic leader. Because I feel like in the past, sometimes people are like, I'm going to mimic this other thing that I saw, or this person's successful and I want to be successful like they are, so I will adopt that style. And I think now we're really kind of in this place where you can 100% be vulnerable and honest and transparent and all these things. It doesn't hurt anyone when you learn how to do it, tactfully and appropriately for the workplace. So it's really cool also now to have gotten away from those things where they're like, what's your leadership style? It's either autocratic, it's right. So it's
right.
Now it's like we've acknowledged that it's a mixture and it's none of those things all at the same time.
Totally. I mean, I do think we're at an inflection point for sort of the rise of attention on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and applying that to how people show up at work, right? And thinking about neurodiversity and having more appreciation for, hey, people think differently and they operate differently, and we can't expect everybody to operate the same. And I personally have struggled with that in my career, not so much now, but in younger days, people would say things like, well, she's got some sharp edges, which I've never heard anybody say that about a man, but that's another podcast. And I remember feeling like I really got to do something about that. Like I have to be less sarcastic, or I have to use humor less, or I have to try to be less direct. And that didn't feel good. It felt like wearing my shoes on the opposite feet, but I thought that's what was required to be successful. Now I don't feel that way anymore. Yes, I'm sure there were things that I did need to hone as far as sort of how I showed up in a professional environment. I no longer feel like I have to be someone else. And maybe that's just comes with age and wisdom, but that's a good feeling.
Absolutely. I know in my own personality, there were things that needed to be honed as well. But then there's also that piece where it's like, that guy just came in here and screamed at everybody. And you guys are like, bravo, what an amazing leader. Right. And I give you some direct feedback and you're like,
Yeah, right. I'm sure there was a lot to that feedback. And it was a way to keep you down.
So now your team supports building the leaders within your organization. So how do you approach leader development with your team members while you know that they're actively navigating leader development spaces themselves?
I think I approach how people pursue leader development just like I approach how they pursue anything else, which is, one, I hope that I'm modeling the behavior of one type of successful leader. And the characteristics I'm thinking of are things like that I've already talked about: vulnerability, humility, humor, all of those things, but also trust. I try my hardest. It's actually not that hard to do. I mean, I hire people smarter than me. When you hire someone to do a job, you need to let them do that job. I don't pretend to know all the answers. I mean, you're a great example. You know eons more than I do about leadership development, because you are really, of anyone I've ever met, sort of like truest version of a student of leadership development with a passion for it. So why on earth do I think I would come in and tell you, like, this is the way you need to do it? I could do that, but that would squash you like a bug and demotivate you and limit our thinking. So unless someone gives me a reason not to trust them, I'm going to trust them to do great work. And it's my job to remove barriers and obstacles and provide support when it's needed. I want to let people do what they think they need to do to be successful. And then when they're successful, it's all them. And if they're not successful, well, some of it's them, but some of it's probably me too.
I love that, because then it's not kind of like you said, it's not like this is what success looks like. Here is the definite path, because we know the path changes. That just being able to be open. But I think there's also a confidence that you possess with that, because I think that a leader has to be really confident in themselves, and then of course in the people that they work with, to be able to do that and to be able to relinquish essentially a certain type of control that one could have in the workplace. I would say from my perspective, I think confidence plays a big role in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like, I learn it's more fun to be in a place where everyone's learning from one another, right? I'm not like, who am I? Like, I'm not sitting up on a ivory tower just imparting my wisdom on the world. Who wants that? And that would be lonely for me, and I wouldn't be learning and growing, and doesn't feel very fulfilling. So I would much rather just get in the dirt with people when I can, try to figure some stuff out. But I have a pretty big remit, and I can't be in all those places and all those conversations and all those decisions. So I have to trust the people that took on the roles.
What do you think are some of the challenges in developing leaders?
I think it varies by level. I think what often happens at the manager level is we see this a lot, and I've seen it in every organization I've worked with, so it's not just specific to EA, but that there are people who are in manager roles who really shouldn't be there because they don't really want to be a people manager, but they were put into a role because we wanted to retain them, or we wanted to pay them more, or they were the best at what they did in a particular role. And it's unfortunate because we're not doing that person any favors, because they either don't like it or don't feel equipped to do that job well. And then we're certainly not helping the team at all because they're not getting the support that they need. I mean, I said manager, but I just had a situation the other day where I was talking to someone who I coach, and he was sharing, he's having some struggle with his boss, who's fairly senior, of getting sort of support from a development perspective. He and I agreed that, I said, well, you should just talk to him. You should tell him that, like say, hey, I'd like some help to navigating my career. I want to kind of like to work with you to figure out, what the next step is. And he did that, and he went to his boss, and his boss said, I have no idea. Like literally, I have no idea, I can't help you. Like stop, full stop, which is scary, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you don't have to have all the answers, but say like, I'm not really sure, but I'm going to work to figure that out. And I'm going to learn, and I'm going to connect you to the right people. I think we see it a lot. We have a lot of sort of player coaches, and they spend more time on the player than the coaching. So that I think is a challenge that we see that is difficult to overcome. That's difficult to overcome because those are sort of structural. And sometimes those people are developable and sometimes they're not, or they don't have the willingness. Then I think what we often see is a lack of self-awareness. And that I think that's not really associated with the level either. It's surprising how you will see some people who are very senior in their career who really are pretty clueless about how they show up and what their gifts are and where they may need to get stronger. And so that's why I always want to start any leadership development with some emphasis on self and figuring out what's going on with me, right, before I can focus on my team or the business overall, because I don't know that I can be very successful if I'm not clear on my blind spots and my gifts. And then I think the last one, and these three aren't the only, but these are just three that came to my mind, is oftentimes when people get to a particular level, they sort of think, they act as if, maybe they don't think they are, but they sort of act as if they're fully cooked. And what? I don't know, me, the older I get, the more I feel like the less certain I become, right? And the more curious I become. Whereas I do see people, and I'm not trying to pat myself on the back so hard, but I do see people who are like, they sort of act as if there's really nothing that they need to get better at. So I don't know if that's a defense mechanism, because it's like they believe, well, once I'm at a certain level, I need to be the person who knows all the answers, right? And so I need to be fully committed to looking good, being right, and being in control for people to think I'm a strong leader. versus the opposite, which is people think you're a strong leader if they trust you, if you're vulnerable, if you demonstrate humility with things you don't know. But it's a paradox, and you see it a lot, and you see it more in more senior leaders, because I think maybe at times they don't feel safe. Some of it could be cultural, to the organization, but some of it also is an individual just might not feel safe to say, I'm really not that good at that, or I really want to get better at this.
Absolutely. And I think when I see it in more senior people, I also think there's like the great man theory, which kind of came into play in the early 1930s. And it was immediately dismissed because they were not the attributes of good leadership at all. But someone happened to put it in a book, and now everybody was like, that's leadership. And for some reason, even though now it's almost 100 years later, we still hang on to those things. And that's that the leader has all the answers. They're the sage on the stage.
Yep.
And people come to you, and you are also the hoarder, if you will, of knowledge and information, of tasks, and you'll dole it out when appropriate. And it's just so interesting because even now, like you said, there's senior leaders now, and I've seen it as well in multiple organizations. It's been proven now that prior to this great man theory when it came along, but then also especially within the last 20 years, that leaders ask great questions. That's their job. It's absolutely not their job to have all of the answers. And I believe it was W. Warner Burke who pointed out that your technical skill and your ability to lead people are in no way correlated. So you can be really smart, and that's super cool, and good on you. Be a subject matter expert, but that does not mean that you have any leadership qualities or skills that can be assumed from that. So I always think it's so interesting where there's these old ways of thinking, and I feel like people read one book 90 years ago, and they're like, that's it, that's the book. Read more books.
Maybe it's because I'm in this field, but so often I think, I wish that there was as much value placed on the currency of a great people leader as to somebody who's a great technologist or strategist. It's like, they're both really important. And to your point, it doesn't have to be in the same person. Sometimes it is, but it doesn't need to be. And why don't we value those people who are just really amazing people leaders for that versus, well, you have to have all these other things too, because nobody's good at everything. But there seems to be sort of a pecking order about which of those skills, and I'm sure, in different organizations, it's valued differently. Great people leadership usually falls towards the bottom of the list.
Yes, those quote unquote soft skills, which I know World Economic Forum was like, call them what they are, which is business critical skills. This is what helps people, keep their organizations open and trusting and developing.
Yeah, business acumen is important, but people acumen, I think, is a lot harder and arguably more important.
You had mentioned earlier, when you hire people, obviously you bring them in, you trust them to do great work. So when you're looking at building your team or bringing new members into your team, how do you assess the right kind of diversity to create and strike that balance?
So I think I used to think more about the diversity that you could see when I was trying to build a diverse team. And that's always been a value to me, but I think I was doing it wrong before. I would look back when I joined Electronic Arts, you could look at my team, like a photograph of my team, and you could say, Jane has a really diverse team. Jane is a diverse leader. But I really wanted people who thought like I did, because it was much less friction. So you bring someone in who thinks like you, so you can kind of get this shorthand going. You don't even really have to talk. You just kind of do some winks and nods and you're rolling, because I can get really tactical and just driving towards completion. And it's a lot faster if you have people who are like you. So I'm not talking about people that look like me, but people that think like me. And I realized that I had a team and we did some sort of assessment and everyone was the same type, quote unquote. We didn't have anybody who had a creative bone in their body. And I was like, oh, maybe that's why all of our stuff is so boring and the same. It's like we're not doing anything different because we didn't have anybody who shakes things up or thinks disruptively. And some of it may have had to do with my leadership, but I think it also had to do with the fact that I was just selecting people who thought like me, and I felt like copacetic with. And it's sort of like my husband and I are opposites, and they say opposites attract, which is true, but they're also higher maintenance. Like my parents were the exact person, just different genders. They almost never fought. They were madly in love until the end. It was easy squeezy. Not the same with my husband. So it takes work, right? It can be much more exciting and interesting. And when we're working on all cylinders, it's much more, we can really do a lot in a really interesting way. So that's sort of how I started thinking with teams, was when I would talk to somebody who kind of made me feel a little uncomfortable. And I don't mean uncomfortable in a creepy way, but uncomfortable in I hadn't thought of that, or gosh, that's kind of scary. Like, well, how this person is talking about how they would approach this. I challenge myself to move towards that as opposed to going, oh, hells no. And so now I'm proud to say, if you looked at our team, a photograph of our team, you would say, Jane believes in diversity by looking at that picture. But if you got to know the people on our team, you would say, Jane believes in diversity because that is an island of misfit toys. And because of that, I think, some things probably, they might take a little longer, or we might have to try a few things out before we get to the right quote unquote answer. But I just think it's so much more interesting, and there's so much more to learn from people. So it's diversity of everything: background, experience, capability, interests, you name it.
The other thing that I notice about being on your team is that I feel like I can throw something out to the group and it becomes this really amazing think tank where I'm going to get all these different ideas and perspectives and input and what upcoming challenges that people see.
I mean, that's great to hear, because what I never want, because I've been in a situation, and I'm sure you have too, where you worked on a team where you got smacked down, whack-a-mole style. If you said something was too off or different from the normal practice, I've definitely heard people say, well, that's not how it works here, that we tried that before. And, it sounds cliche, but it's true. I've been in that, and it stinks. And I'm sure I do it every now and then, but it's certainly not something that I want. And I know that, I feel like most of the people on the team, to a person, really listen openly to ideas.
Something that I've encountered on this team that I've never encountered before is that if people do have the vibe of that's not how we do it, it's more like, well, how do we change it, right? How do we make this new thing work? And what would be the obstacles to that? Because if someone's initial thought is that's not how we do things here, there's the part of me that's immediately annoyed. But then there's the other part of me that's like, well, tell me more about why it wouldn't work.
Right.
So I can find how it would.
Yeah. I think, I've been around long enough now that I'm sure I say things like, we've tried that. And in fact, I've heard myself say, yeah, we did that 7 years ago, and here's why it didn't work. That's a really short-sighted thing to say, because there's lots of reasons why it didn't work. And it also was a different time and place. So listen openly.
How do you advise others to balance their own self-development and the development of those that they lead or of the people around them? And what are the challenges with that?
I think, with the people on my team, I really want to find what it is that person is really interested in developing or strengthening, and then determining how I help them. So if that's about freeing up some time or removing obstacles or connecting them to people or finding or funding resources, I believe I do that. What I don't think I'm as great at, though, is thinking about that when I'm thinking about the work that they're doing, right? I can get very caught in the work that they're doing and thinking about they are learning through the work that they're doing. And it's not learning you don't learn by doing. You learn by reflecting. You learn by discussing. And so I think for me, that's how I learn, is I'll look at something as an opportunity, right? Like I'm working on something in my, with my skill set, and it's like, well, I have this opportunity in 2 weeks to present to Joe Blow, and I'm working on this one thing, and I'm going to use that as an opportunity. And I'm going to ask Sally Sue, who's going to be in the meeting, to observe, and then I'm going to talk to her afterwards and see what she thought, how I did. It's less about me going to a class on influence skills, and it's more about actually trying something out and then either getting feedback or reflecting on it, writing about it, talking to somebody about it. So I don't know that I'm super intentional. I mean, I think I coach people to do that too, maybe more than I think about protecting time for development. So I think I have to do more of that, right? Because I think people do need to have time when they can actually take a deep breath and pick their head up out of the work. If that means in that time they're going to read an article, or they're going to go to a webinar, or they're going to reflect on something that happened last week, it's still time that should be protected. And I think I forget that.
And that's such a great point about reflection. Try different things, and sometimes we move through them and it maybe works out or it didn't. But people act like you just get all these reps in and then you're magically good at something. When
Right.
in reality, it's like what did or didn't work and why. So I can, if it was good, I can repeat that. But if it wasn't, I know the pieces to fix instead of just throwing the whole thing out and being like, it didn't work.
Right. Or really seizing on an opportunity. I mean, you learn when you lose, much more than when you win. So when you do, step in it, to take the opportunity to go, well, what did I learn? What would I do differently?
What leadership advice would you offer current leaders in any organization?
I got a really short answer. Be yourself.
Do you have a book or a resource that you recommend to others?
I knew you were going to ask this question, and my answer was going to be, I do. Her name is Natasha, and I just go to her and she tells me what to read or listen to.
This has been amazing, Jane. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Equipping Leaders podcast. For more leadership development content, you can visit my website, natashacheyenne.com, where you will find my leadership journal with dozens of articles, and the Cultivation Cafe, which is always growing and has leadership frameworks, book recommendations, and inclusion and mental health resources. You can also follow me on Instagram at novel_Natasha or at Equipping Leaders Podcast, and on Twitter at Natasha Cheyenne. Join me next week for another episode.